The line between survival and savagery is thinner than river ice. In the unforgiving winter of 1883, the town of Deliverance, Montana, was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. They were God-fearing folk who lived by the rifle, and they had one rule. What was theirs, and what was wild was to be feared or destroyed. But when Elara Vance, the town's silent telegraph operator, broke that rule for the smallest, most innocent of reasons, she didn't just invite a reckoning. She unmasked a monster hiding in plain sight. This is the story of the choice, the baby, and the warrior who knelt. The wind did not just blow in Deliverance, Montana. It laid siege. During the grief-struck winter of 1883, it was a living entity, a shrieking, invisible beast that had clawed its way down from the northern peaks and had not relinquished its grip for 2 solid months. It piled snow in drifts that buried fences, sculpted cottages into unrecognizable white mounds, and carried a cold so profound it felt like a judgment. The cold was a physical weight, a presence that pressed against the windows of Elara Vance's small cabin, which also served as the town's telegraph and mail office. The glass, thick and warped, was layered with an inch of intricate, fern-like frost, turning the outside world into a blurred, luminous white void. Elara Vance was a woman sculpted by silence and loss. She was not old, perhaps 30, but the lines of grief and resilience were etched around her eyes and mouth, maps of a life that had demanded more from her than she had ever expected to give. Her husband, Arthur, a good-natured engineer who had believed in the promise of the railroad, had been taken by cholera 3 years prior. Her son Thomas, a bright, laughing boy of 6, had been taken by the river, the very same one that now lay frozen just 100 yards from her door. 2 summers ago, he had chased a butterfly and slipped on the muddy bank. She had found his small boot. That was all. The town of Deliverance left her alone, mostly. She was the vital, silent cog that connected them to the outside world. Her fingers, tapping the brass key of the telegraph, were their lifeline to markets in Cheyenne, to family in the east, to the federal marshals in Helena who never seemed to come. She was necessary, and for that, her strangeness, her preference for books over gossip, her long, solitary walks, her quiet refusal to attend the Sunday sermons of Pastor Davies, was tolerated, if not approved. This morning, the cold was different. It had teeth. The fire in her cast-iron stove roared, devouring the dry pine she fed it, but the chill seemed to seep up from the very floorboards. The telegraph wires hummed, a high, mournful C-sharp that she could feel in her teeth. It was the sound of ultimate tension, of metal strained to its breaking point. Elara was sorting mail, her fingers stiff despite the woolen gloves, when the sound first cut through the wind's howl. It was not a human sound. Not at first. It was a thin, desperate cry, high-pitched and sharp, like a rabbit caught in a snare. The wind was a great mimic. It played tricks, stealing the sounds of men and beasts and twisting them into its own desolate song. Elara paused, her hand hovering over a letter for Jedediah Scull, the town's wealthiest and most feared rancher. She listened. The wind shrieked. Silence. She returned to her work. It was nothing. It was the cold. Then it came again. Weaker this time, but unmistakably a cry. It was the sound of a living thing, fighting for air in a world determined to freeze it solid. A knot of ice formed in Elara's own stomach. It was the sound she had listened for, day and night, for a week after Thomas had vanished. The sound of a child. "It is the wind," she whispered aloud, her voice hoarse. "It is only the wind." But it wasn't. The sound was too precise, too wrapped in panic and pain. It was coming from the river. She stared at her door. To open it was to invite the sub-zero siege into her home. To go outside was madness. The temperature had not risen above 0 in a week. A person could freeze, solid, in less than an anchor if they were unprepared. She was prepared. She had her heavy bison coat, the one Arthur had bought her, her thick-soled boots, the wool scarf wrapped tight. She didn't make a decision. Her body simply moved. She pulled on her coat, grabbed the heavy fireplace poker, and wrapped her scarf twice around her face, leaving only a small slit for her eyes. She put a small, loaded Remington revolver in her deep coat pocket. Not for animals, but for the ice. Sometimes, a shot could crack a bad patch. Opening the door was a battle. The wind tore it from her grasp and slammed it against the cabin wall. A sheet of fine, granular snow blasted the room, extinguishing a candle on the table and sending sorted letters scattering across the floor. She ignored them, forced the door closed against the gale, and stepped into the white hell. The world was gone. There was no sky, no ground, only a swirling, blinding vortex of white. The air was so cold it burned her lungs, a dry, sharp fire with every inhalation. She leaned into the wind, following the familiar, buried path to the riverbank, her boots sinking almost to her knees with every step. The poker was her guide, plunging into the snow ahead of me, feeling for the solid ground beneath. The crying had stopped. No, she breathed, the words stolen by the wind. Panic, cold and sharp as the air, lanced her chest. Had she imagined it? Had she waited too long? She reached the riverbank, a steep, snow-covered slope. The river itself was a long, grey-green ribbon of ice, its surface scarred by the wind. She scanned the bank. Nothing. Just drifts, broken branches, and the white, endless emptiness. She was turning back, a hollow, terrible guilt settling over her, when she saw it. A patch of colour. Down, near the water's edge, where the ice had cracked and refrozen, a small bundle was wedged between two stones. It was a cradleboard, Lakota by the make. She knew instantly. The intricate beadwork, the shape of the willow frame. She had seen them from a distance, carried by the women of the bands that sometimes passed far to the south. It was face down, half submerged in the icy slush where the current still fought the freeze. She slid down the bank, snow filling her boots. She used the poker to hook the cradleboard and drag it from the water's grip. It was heavy, waterlogged. She turned it over, her frozen fingers fumbling with the leather. Inside, wrapped in stiff, soaked rabbit furs, was a baby. It was tiny, its skin a pale, alarming shade of bluish-grey. Its eyes were closed, its lips purple. It was not crying. It was not moving. Ilara's heart stopped at. She saw Thomas, his face pale, his boot in her hand. She ripped her glove off. The air at 20 below 0 seared her skin. She pressed her bare fingers to the baby's neck. The skin was icy. There was no pulse. She pressed again, harder, desperately. A flutter. A faint, thready pulse, as weak as a moth's wing. Thump. Pause. Thump. It was alive. She ripped the cradleboard apart, pulling the small form free from the soaked furs. Without a second thought, she unbuttoned her heavy bison coat, unbuttoned the wool shirt beneath, and pressed the frozen, tiny body directly against her own skin. The shock of the cold was so intense, it made her cry out, a sharp, ragged gasp. The baby was a block of ice, but her own body heat was a furnace. She buttoned her shirt over the child, then the coat, creating a small, dark, warm cave. She held the baby's head, careful to keep its face clear for air, its cold cheek pressed against her breast. "You will not die," she whispered, a vow made to the wind, to God, to the ghost of her own son. "Not today. I will not let you." She turned and began the fight back up the hill. The wind was a solid wall, trying to push her back, to reclaim the life she had stolen from the river. But Elara Vance was a woman who had already lost everything she loved. She had nothing left to fear from a storm. She bent her head, the small, cold weight against her heart, and pushed her way back to the cabin, a living, breathing act of defiance against the frozen world. She didn't know it, but she had just ignited the spark that would burn Deliverance to its foundations. The cabin, which had felt like an icebox when she left, was now a sweltering haven. Elara slammed the door against the wind, the bolt scraping loud in the sudden silence. She tore off her coat, her movements frantic. The baby made a small, mewling sound, a protest against the return to the cold air. "It's all right," she murmured, her voice trembling. She laid the child on her cot, on the pile of warm blankets near the stove. It was a boy. He was still a terrifying, mottled grey, but the blue tint was receding from his lips. His small, starfish hands were clenched, and his eyes were squeezed shut. He was so small, he looked fragile as spun glass. Around his neck, on a leather thong, was a small, smooth river stone, carved with the shape of a dragonfly. Elara worked with a desperate, practiced efficiency. She stripped away his wet bindings and wrapped him in the driest, warmest wool she had, her own son's christening blanket, which she had kept in a chest. She warmed a tin of milk by the fire, watered it down, and using a clean rag, patiently squeezed it, drop by drop, into the corner of the baby's mouth. At first, he didn't respond. Then, a primal instinct took over. He turned his head, his mouth fastening weakly on the rag. He swallowed. He swallowed again. Elara wept, a dry, harsh sob that shook her. It was the first time she had cried in 2 years. She sat by the fire, rocking the tiny, swaddled form, feeding him, whispering the only soothing words she knew, the nursery rhymes she used to sing to Thomas. The cabin was her sanctuary, her island, and for these few hours the world was held at bay. But the world always finds a way in. By late afternoon, the storm had lessened, its fury spent. The wind had died down to a low, mournful sigh, and a pale, watery sunlight filtered through the frosted glass. The baby was asleep, his breathing shallow but regular, a faint patch of healthy color returning to his cheeks. Elara, however, was out of milk, and she needed more wood for the stove. She wrapped the baby in a new, dry sling made from a wool shawl, securing him against her chest under her coat. She could not, would not, leave him. She would go to Hupwell's general store, get what she needed, and be back before anyone was the wiser. Deliverance was a town of watchful eyes. Her journey from the cabin to the store, usually a 5-minute walk, felt like a gauntlet. The snow was packed hard. The town was digging itself out. Men were on roofs, shoveling snow. Mrs. Gable, the pastor's wife, and the town's chief repository of rumor, was sweeping her porch, her eyes, sharp as needles, fixed on Elara. Elara kept her head down, her face hidden by her scarf, but the bulge under her coat was unmistakable. She reached Hupwell's. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful, jarring sound. The store was warm and smelled of coffee beans, cured tobacco, and oiled leather. Mr. Hupwell, a small, nervous man with a perpetually damp brow, was polishing the counter. Mrs. Vance, a terrible storm, terrible. Thought we'd lost the wires for good this time. "The wires are holding, Mr. Hupwell," Elara said, her voice quiet. "I need a tin of condensed milk and a bag of oats." Of course, of course." He bustled away, his eyes never quite meeting hers. Well, if it isn't our little—" He paused, mocking. Our little widow." Ilara's blood ran colder than the river. Jedediah Skull was leaning against the far counter, a barrel of pickles to his left, a sack of flour to his right. He was a big man, broad and thick, with a tangled iron-grey beard and eyes the colour of a dull winter sky. He ran the biggest cattle ranch in the valley, the Bar S, and his power was absolute. He was known for two things: his wealth and his visceral public hatred of the Lakota. He had served as a scout in his younger days, and he wore his prejudices like a badge of honor. He claimed the only good Injun was a dead one, and many in the town, fearing raids and remembering old conflicts, were inclined to agree with him. "Buying milk, Ilara?" Skull said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Getting a taste for it yourself? Or perhaps you've taken in a stray cat?" Ilara ignored him, placing her coins on the counter. "Just the milk and oats, Mr. Hupwell." Hupwell's hands were shaking. He fumbled with the change. "Here you are, Mrs. Vance." As Ilara turned to leave, the baby, warm and secure, chose that moment to stir. He let out a small, contented sigh, a sound that was immediately swallowed by the store's silence. Skull went still. His eyes, previously lazy and mocking, sharpened. He moved with a speed that was terrifying in a man his size, blocking her path to the door. "What's that you've got under your coat, girl?" he demanded. Ilara met his gaze. "It's a baby, Mr. Skull. Now, if you'll excuse me." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "A baby? Don't play me for a fool. You're as barren as that patch of alkali flat north of here. You lost your chance at motherhood." The cruelty of the words, spoken so casually, hit her like a physical blow. But before she could respond, the store's bell chimed again. Sheriff Brody stamped the snow from his boots. He was a tall, lean man, worn down by the competing demands of his job. He was not a bad man, but he was a pragmatic one, and he valued peace above justice. "Skull, Mrs. Vance," he nodded, his eyes taking in the scene. Skull blocking the door, Ilara pale and rigid. "Trouble?" "No trouble, Sheriff," Skull sneered. "Just asking our telegraph operator here what she's smuggling. Seems she's grown a second head." "It's a baby," Ilara said again, her voice clear and cold. "I found him. By the river. He was freezing to death." Brody's face went grey. He knew. He instantly understood the implications. "Ilara, what kind of baby?" Ilara unbuttoned the top of her coat. The baby's dark, sleeping face was visible, his fine black hair stark against the white wool of her son's blanket. A heavy, dangerous silence filled the store. Mr. Hupwell looked as if he was going to be sick. A Lakota," Hupwell stammered. "My God, Ilara, it's a savage!" "It's a baby," Ilara snapped, her patience gone. Skull's face had darkened to a furious, mottled purple. "She's brought it here? Into the town? Are you insane, woman?" he roared. "Do you know what this means? They'll be looking for it. They'll come. They'll burn us out. They'll scalp every woman and child here, all because you played mother to a redskin rat." "He was dying," Ilara cried, clutching the baby closer. "It should have died," Skull bellowed. "It's nature's way. You've interfered, Ilara. You've brought this curse on us." "That's enough, Jed," Brody said, but his voice lacked conviction. He turned to Ilara, his face full of a weary dread. "Ilara, you know the law. You know the treaty line. We don't mix. They don't mix. It's the only way we keep the peace. You have to give him to me." "Give him to you? To do what?" Ilara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Leave him out in the snow? Give him to Mr. Skull?" Skull smiled, a terrible, thin-lipped expression. "I'd take care of it. Quick and clean. Settle the problem before it starts." Ilara looked at Brody. "Sheriff, Is that what you intend?" Brody ran a hand over his face. "Elara, think. Just think. A baby doesn't just get lost in a storm like this. It means they're close. A war party. They're probably watching the town right now. You harboring that child is an act of war." "She's a traitor!" Mrs. Gable shrieked. She had been listening from the door, and now a small, angry crowd was gathering behind her. "An Injun lover! She's risking our children for a savage—" The word traitor hung in the air. The mood, already tense, turned ugly. The crowd pressed in. "Give us the baby, Elara," someone shouted. "It ain't human, not really." Elara backed away, her heart hammering. She looked at Brody, pleading. "Sheriff, stop this." Brody drew his gun, but he pointed it at the ceiling. "Everybody calm down. This is my jurisdiction." He looked at Elara, his eyes hard. "But they're right, Elara. You've made a terrible mistake. Go home. Lock your door. I will deal with Skull. But I'll be back in 1 hour, and you will give me that child. We'll take it back to the treaty line. Leave it where they can find it. Leave it to freeze again." Skull laughed. "You've got 1 hour, widow. Then, if the sheriff won't act, the good people of Deliverance will." Elara didn't wait. She ran. She pushed through the crowd, which parted for her, their faces a mixture of fear and contempt. She ran, stumbling in the deep snow, back to the cabin, the baby's small, warm weight a single point of life in a world gone mad. She slammed the bolt home, her back against the door, and listened as the town of Deliverance began to sharpen its knives. The hour passed in a suffocating, stretched silence. The baby slept, blissfully unaware, his small belly full of warm milk. Elara sat in her rocking chair, the small Remington revolver in her lap, watching the light in the cabin die. The watery sun dipped behind the western peaks, plunging the valley into a deep, purple twilight. She did not light a lamp. She was a target. The telegraph machine, silent all day, suddenly burst to life. The sharp, metallic clack, clack, clack shattered the quiet. It was Brody from the sheriff's office, using the town's private line, ELARA, SCULL, HAS, MEN, DRUNK, BARRICADE, DOOR, DONOT, OPEN, WAIT, FOR, ME. He was trying to help, or perhaps he was just trying to control the situation. Skull, drunk with a mob of equally drunk, terrified and racist men, was a disaster waiting to happen. Brody was trying to prevent a lynching, or a fire. Elara's hands, which had been so steady, began to shake. She was trapped. She looked at the baby, his face so peaceful. She thought of her son, Thomas. She had been unable to save him. She would not fail this one. She picked up the revolver. She checked the cylinders. 6 shots. Against Skull and his men? It was nothing. But it was not for them. She set it back down, disgusted with the thought. The darkness in the cabin was total, broken only by the orange-red glow from the stove's grate. Outside she heard them, a low murmur of voices, the crunch of many boots on snow, a few drunken, ugly shouts. "Injun lover! Burn her out! Give us the baby, witch!" They were at her door. Someone kicked it. The heavy oak shuddered. "Elara Vance!" It was Skull's roar. "You have 5 minutes to hand over that savage whelp. After that, we're coming in, and we're purifying this town with fire." Elara moved to the window, peering through a small patch she had rubbed free of frost. She could see them, a dark mass of at least a dozen men, torches in their hands, long rifles slung on their backs. They were shadows, demons in the firelight. "Where is Brody?" she whispered. A shot rang out, not at her cabin, but from the center of town. Then another, shouting. Brody was busy. Skull had likely paid some of his ranch hands to start a fight, draw the sheriff away. It was a calculated, brutal move. "Time's up, Elara," Skull yelled. A heavy log, used as a makeshift battering ram, struck the door. The wood splintered, but the bar held. Crash. Again. The hinges groaned. Elara grabbed the baby's sling, strapped him to her chest, and covered him with her coat. She grabbed the fireplace poker, its end glowing a dull red from the stove. She would not die kneeling. Crash! The top hinge ripped from the frame. The door sagged, held only by the bar and the bottom hinge. One more! Skull roared. The cabin was silent. The men outside paused. Even the wind held its breath. Then, a new sound. A different sound. A low, guttural cry, more animal than human, echoed from the ridge above the town. It was not a sound of rage. It was a sound of profound, bottomless grief. A wolf's howl, but made by a man. The men outside froze. The torchlight illuminated their pale, terrified faces, turned upward toward the sound. "What in the hell was that?" one of them stammered. "It's them," another whispered, his voice cracking. "They're here. The whole war party." The mob, so brave seconds before, dissolved. Torches were dropped, sputtering in the snow. Men scrambled over each other, desperate to get back to the perceived safety of their own homes. "Cowards!" Skull bellowed, but he too was looking at the ridge, his rifle now in his hands, his bravado gone. "Get back here!" But they were gone. Skull, realizing he was now alone, exposed in the moonlight, cursed, and retreated into the shadows of the alley by Hupwell's. Elara waited, her heart pounding. The sound did not come again. The night was still. She stayed in the rocking chair, the poker in one hand, the baby against her heart, and waited for the dawn. She did not sleep. She listened to the broken door clicking in the wind, to the child's soft breathing, and to the sound of her own fear. The sunrise was a painful, glorious smear of blood orange and violet. It illuminated a world of pristine, undisturbed snow. The mob was gone. The town was silent, as if in shame. Elara was exhausted, her body aching, her nerves raw. The baby was awake, fussing, hungry. She was just rising to warm more milk when it came. Knock, knock, knock. It was not a kick. It was not a fist. It was a polite, firm, deliberate knock, made with knuckles, on the broken frame of her door. Elara froze. The revolver was on the table. She picked it up. "Who is it?" she called, her voice a dry croak. There was no answer. Only knock, knock, knock. She moved to the peephole she had rubbed in the frost. She could see nothing. The visitor was standing too close. "Sheriff Brody?" Silence. She took a breath. She cocked the small revolver. She held it at her side, hidden in the folds of her skirt. She used her left hand to unlatch the heavy bar. The broken door groaned open a few inches, held by the one remaining hinge. He was there. He was not a savage. He was not a demon. He was a man. He was tall, built of lean, hard muscle, with a face that looked carved from the same granite as the mountains. His hair was long and black, braided with otter fur. He wore bleached, beaded buckskins, but no bison coat. He was seemingly indifferent to the cold that had almost killed Elara. His face was a mask of grief, exhaustion, and a fierce, burning intelligence. In his hand, he held not a tomahawk or a rifle, but a single, small, carved wooden bird. He was a Lakota warrior, and he was alone. Elara's hand tightened on the revolver. Her knuckles were white. This was it, the moment the town had feared. The one-man war party. He looked at her, his dark eyes seeming to see everything. The fear, the exhaustion, the defiance. His gaze dropped to the revolver, then back to her face. He did not move. He did not seem to breathing. Then he looked past her, into the cabin. He saw the cot. He saw the small, white blanket, her son's blanket. His composure, so absolute, shattered. A tremor ran through him, his eyes fixed on the bundle in her arms. Ilara instinctively stepped back, raising the revolver. "Stay back." The warrior did not move forward. He did not raise his hands. He did not issue a threat. He did something that disarmed her more completely than any weapon could have. He met her eyes. He held up the small wooden bird, and then, slowly, deliberately, the Lakota warrior sank to his knees. He placed the carving on the snow-dusted threshold, lowered his head, and knelt at her door. It was not an act of surrender. It was an act of supplication. It was the plea of a father. Ilara Vance looked at the warrior, knelt in the snow, a man who held all the power to kill her, yet had chosen to beg. She looked at the small, carved bird. She looked at the baby in her arms, who was now staring, wide-eyed, at the man. She lowered the gun. She opened the door. The warrior rose, but did not enter. He waited, his head bowed, until Ilara stepped back, a clear, unspoken invitation. He moved with a liquid grace, entering the small cabin and bringing the sharp, clean scent of pine smoke and winter air with him. He was large, and the cabin, Ilara's tiny, organized world, seemed to shrink around him. Yet he made himself small. He did not look around, did not inspect her possessions. His entire desperate focus was on the child in her arms. Ilara closed the shattered door, wedging it shut with a chair. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hiss-crackle of the stove. The baby, who had cried at the sight of the townsfolk, was calm. He stared at the warrior, his dark eyes curious. The warrior pointed, not at the baby, but at himself. "8," he said. The word was soft. "Father." He pointed to the child. "Seton." "Hawk." Then he looked at Ilara, his eyes asking the question he could not speak. "I found him," Ilara said, her voice hoarse. "By the river. In the ice. He was frozen. I brought him here. I warmed him. I fed him." The warrior listened to the tone of her voice, watching her face. He understood. His own face, a mask of stoic grief, seemed to crack. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, the gratitude in them was so profound it was painful to see. He held up the small wooden bird again. Ilara, shifting the baby, reached for the amulet around the child's neck. She pulled it out, the carved dragonfly. The warrior then produced from his own pouch a small, identical carved dragonfly. He held the bird and the dragonfly together. He was trying to tell her, "These are a set. They belong together. He is mine." "His mother?" Ilara asked, dreading the answer. The warrior's face hardened. He did not seem to understand the word, but the implication was clear. He made a motion, a sharp, violent gesture, and then held his side, his face contorting in pain. Wounded. Not dead. Wounded. He had been tracking them. Ilara pieced it together. The man, his wife, and their child. They had been attacked. The mother was wounded, hidden somewhere. The father had been leading the attackers away, or hunting, and had returned to find this. But this didn't make sense. The storm. The cradleboard in the river. It was too random. The warrior saw her confusion. He stalked to the window, his intensity filling the room. He pointed out, toward the river, and then made a motion of falling, of slipping. He was describing her part of the story. Then he held up one finger. "Wait." He reached into the leather pouch at his hip. Ilara flinched, her hand moving toward the revolver, still on the table. The warrior froze. He saw her movement. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled his hand out. It was empty. He held it up, showing her he was unarmed. No, not this pouch. He pointed to another, smaller one. He made a gesture of asking permission. Elara nodded, her heart hammering. He reached into the other pouch. He pulled out, not a weapon, but a small, heavy object. He held it between his thumb and forefinger and placed it, not in her hand, but on the table. It was a bullet casing. Elara stared at it. It was large, not a standard army issue 45-70. This was a custom load, a .50 caliber Sharps, favored by buffalo hunters for its immense power and long-range accuracy. It was greasy, freshly fired. "I don't understand," she whispered. The warrior pointed at the casing. Then he pointed out the window, towards the main street. He made the shape of a large, broad man with his hands. Then he tapped his own chest, hard. He pointed at the casing, then at the child. He was connecting the bullet, a big man, and the baby. Elara's mind raced. Only one man in Deliverance, or in the entire valley, used a .50 caliber Sharps. It was his pride, his signature. He'd had it custom-made in St. Louis. He'd bragged about it in Hupwells, how it could take the head off a buck at 600 yards. Jedediah Skull. The story, the one she'd been told, the one the town believed, was a lie. This wasn't a baby lost in a storm. This wasn't a Lakota war party menacing the town. This was a kidnapping. "Skull," she breathed. The name felt like poison. The warrior's eyes bored into hers. He saw the recognition. He nodded, a single, sharp dip of his chin. The pieces flew together, forming a picture of such horrific, banal evil that it stole Elara's breath. Skull and his men, probably drunk, were out hunting. They stumbled upon the small Lakota family. But Skull didn't just stumble. He was a known Indian hunter, bragging he collected scalps, though Brody always dismissed it as bar talk. They had attacked. The bullet casing was proof. They had wounded the mother. And in the chaos, Skull had taken the baby. But why? For ransom. To provoke the war he so clearly wanted, or for a more sinister, personal trophy. And the river? Elara looked at the warrior. He dropped him. The warrior's face was pure, cold rage. He made a gesture of running, of a horse at full gallop. He made a fumbling motion, lost, dropped, discarded. In the blizzard, in his hurry to get away, Skull or one of his men had dropped the cradle board. They had left the baby to die, a piece of inconvenient, incriminating evidence, to be washed away or frozen, all traces gone. Skull hadn't been afraid of a war party when he'd come to her cabin. He'd been afraid of the baby. He'd been terrified that this child, his victim, had survived. He wasn't trying to protect the town. He was trying to silence the last witness. He was trying to finish the job. "My God," Elara whispered. She looked at the warrior, this man she was raised to fear, and saw only a reflection of her own grief. A father, hunting for his child in a land that wanted him dead. He had been tracking Skull. He had tracked him to Deliverance. He had been on the ridge last night, howling his grief when he saw the mob at her door. He must have seen her in Hupwells with the child. He had been watching her. He had been waiting. And in that moment, Elara Vance knew, with chilling certainty, what she had to do. She was a woman of words. Her telegraph was her voice, her connection to a world of law and order that seemed a million miles away. Skull had power, guns, and a mob. She had the wire. She turned to the warrior. "8," she said, using his word. "Father." She pointed to the baby. "Seton." Then she pointed to herself. "Elara." She held out her hand, not in friendship, but in alliance. The warrior looked at her hand. He did not take it. Instead, he reached out and, with one finger, gently, reverently, touched the sleeping baby's cheek. Then he looked at Elara, and for the first time, his face was not hard. It was a look of unbearable, terrible and absolute trust. "Wait," she said, pointing to the chair. "Stay." She then pointed to the door. "Skull. Bad." He understood. He nodded. He would be her guard. Elara strode to the other side of the cabin, to the small oak desk that held her telegraph key. She sat down, her back to the warrior and the child, and faced her true weapon. She had a bullet casing. She had a witness. And she had a direct line to the federal marshal in Helena. Jedediah Skull wanted a war. Elara Vance was about to give him one. The telegraph key was a cold, small brass lever. To Elara, it was an extension of her own will. Her fingers, which had trembled with fear, were now steady. The machine was her territory. In this room, with her hand on this key, she was not a grieving widow or a town pariah. She was the voice of deliverance, and she was about to make that voice heard. The warrior stood sentinel by the broken door, motionless as the mountains, his gaze fixed on the street outside. The baby, Setan, was now awake, lying on Elara's cot, cooing softly as he played with the dragonfly amulet. The domestic tranquility of the scene was a jarring contrast to the tension that hummed in the air, a tension as real and potent as the electricity waiting in the wires. Elara's first call was to the army barracks at Fort Shaw, 100 miles north. Clack, 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 clack. Fort Shaw, Fort Shaw, Fort Shaw. From Deliverance, from Deliverance. Over. She waited. The silence stretched. The warrior shifted his weight. Then, the reply. A quick, sharp clack-clack from the sounder. Deliverance from Fort Shaw. Go ahead. Elara took a deep breath. She began to type, her hand a blur. This was not a plea for help. It was a report. Hostilities in Deliverance. Non-military. Jedediah. Skull. Bar S Ranch. And accomplices. Attacked peaceful Lakota family beyond treaty line. Wounded mother. Kidnapped infant. Infant in my custody. Father. Unarmed is with me. Skull attempted to incite mob to lynch myself and child to hide crime. Physical evidence. .50 caliber sharps casing secured. Situation volatile. Skull is a danger to federal peace. Urgent. Request immediate intervention by U.S. Marshal. I am wiring Marshal Reed in Helena next. Elara Vance. Federal telegraph operator. Deliverance. She signed off, her message sent into the ether. A lightning bolt of truth. The operator at Fort Shaw would be stunned. A woman accusing the most powerful man in the valley, with a Lakota warrior in the room. The operator would have to relay it. It was a federal report. She barely paused. She switched her connection. Clack, 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 clack. Helena Marshall, Helena Marshall, Helena Marshall. From Deliverance. Over. The reply was faster. Marshal Reed was a man who lived by the wire. Go ahead, Deliverance. Elara repeated her message, adding a crucial line. Army at Fort Shaw is aware. Skull is armed and has at least a dozen men. He believes he is the law. Prove him wrong. End she finished, and the silence that descended was heavier than before. She had done it. She had thrown the rock. Now she had to wait for the splash, or more likely, the explosion. It's done, she said, more to herself than to the warrior. He turned, looked at her, then at the machine. He pointed at the key. Words, Elara said. She tapped it. Clack, clack. Words that fly. To the soldiers. To the law. The warrior understood. He pointed to the machine, then to Skull's name, which she had said aloud. He nodded, a grim satisfaction. This was a magic he could appreciate, a long-range weapon he had not known she possessed. The street outside was no longer empty. He comes, the warrior said, his first word in English. He pointed. Elara rushed to the window, peering beside him. Jedediah Skull was back, and he was not alone. This was not a drunken mob. This was his core, his ranch hands, the Bar S crew. They were sober, heavily armed, and they moved with purpose. They fanned out across the street, taking cover behind water troughs and barrels. Sheriff Brody was with them, his hands tied. They had a rope around his neck. He was a prisoner. Skull had just committed a federal crime, kidnapping an officer of the law. He had, Ilara realized, nothing left to lose. "Ilara Vance!" Skull's voice was no longer a drunken roar. It was a cold, flat blade. "You've made your last mistake. You and that red devil you've got in there. I'm counting to 10. You send out the baby, and we'll let you live. You send out the warrior, and we'll let him live, long enough to watch us burn you." This was a new, horrifying twist. He wasn't just trying to cover his tracks. He was enjoying this. "What about the sheriff, Skull?" Ilara shouted through the broken door. "The sheriff's decided to retire." Skull laughed. "He's just here to watch. 1. Ilara looked at the warrior. His face was a mask of cold fury. He checked the simple knife at his belt. He picked up the heavy fireplace poker, the one Ilara had used. He was preparing to die, to sell his life dearly, to buy the child a few more seconds. 2. Ilara ran back to the telegraph. This wasn't part of the plan. "Him, Shem. Skull has Sheriff Brody, hostage. He means to kill us all. Firing on federal office imminent. Vance, clack, clack, clack. A bullet, a .50 caliber slug, tore through the cabin wall, precisely where the telegraph sat. It shattered the machine, sending brass and wood fragments flying. The slug embedded itself, smoking in the wall, inches from Ilara's head. The line was dead. 3, Skull bellowed. Ilara stared at the ruined telegraph. Her weapon was broken. Her connection to the world was severed. Skull's voice. "I heard that tapping, Ilara. You think you're smart, calling for help? There ain't no one coming, not in time." He was right. Helena was days away by horse. Fort Shore, at least 2. She had sent her message, but it was a message in a bottle. They would be dead, the cabin ashes, long before any help arrived. 4. The warrior looked at her. He pointed to the floorboards, to a trap door Ilara used for storing root vegetables. It led to a shallow, dirt-floored cellar. He pointed at her, then at the baby. "Hide." "No," Ilara said, understanding. "I won't. We fight." 5. She grabbed the revolver. She had 6 shots. The warrior had a knife and a poker. The baby, Setan, began to cry, sensing the terror. 6. "He is not wrong," the warrior said, his voice a low rumble. He pointed out the window. "They fear me. They fear—" He tapped his chest. "The Lakota. They do not fear you." "What? What are you saying?" Ilara stammered. 7. "He wants the warrior," the warrior said. "I go. You, Setan, live." He was offering to sacrifice himself, to walk out, to be torn apart by the mob, to give her and his son a chance to escape. "No," Ilara said, her voice shaking with a new cold rage. "No, that is not the law." 8. "It is his law," the warrior replied. He touched his son's head. 8. "Loves Setan." He walked to the door. "Wait!" Ilara cried. She looked at the ruined telegraph. She looked at the hostage, Sheriff Brody. She looked at the cold, determined face of the father. And suddenly, she had a new, terrible, and brilliant idea. 9. "Skull!" Ilara screamed, her voice high and clear. "Stop, don't shoot. You're right." The silence outside was immediate. "What did you say?" Skull called, his voice suspicious. "You're right. I was wrong." Ilara played her part, her voice breaking. "I'm scared. Please, I'll give you the warrior. Just don't hurt me. Don't hurt the baby." The warrior stared at her, his eyes wide with betrayal. Ilara grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in. She whispered, fierce and fast, trust me. Do exactly as I say. When I open the door, fall Fall like you are weak, like you are beaten." The warrior's eyes searched hers. He saw no deceit. He saw a plan. He nodded once. "I'm opening the door, Mr. Skull," Elara cried. I'm pushing him out." He's weak," Elara shouted, her voice a pitch-perfect performance of terror. "He hasn't eaten. I'm pushing him out. Just don't shoot." The warrior stared, his eyes wide with betrayal, but Elara grabbed his arm. "Trust me," she whispered fiercely. "Do exactly as I say. When I open the door, fall like you are beaten." He saw the plan in her eyes and nodded. "I'm opening the door, Mr. Skull," Elara cried. She ripped the chair from the door and pulled it open. The warrior stumbled onto the threshold, his head down, and collapsed to his knees in the snow, his back to Skull's men. He looked utterly defeated. Skull laughed, a booming, triumphant sound. Well, not so tough now, are you, dog? Get him, boys. String him up." Two of his men, cheering, holstered their pistols and pulled out ropes. They advanced on the kneeling warrior, stepping into the open, leaving their cover. "Jed, don't, it's a—" Sheriff Brody croaked. But Skull silenced him. The men reached the warrior. One kicked him hard in the ribs. The warrior exploded. It was not a human movement. It was the uncoiling of a steel spring. In one fluid motion, he rose. The poker in his right hand, still glowing, caught the first man under the chin. The man screamed and fell back. The warrior's knife was already in his left hand, and he slammed the hilt into the second man's temple, dropping him unconscious. It took less than 2 seconds. "He's loose!" Skull shrieked in panic. "Fire! Fire, you fools!" The street erupted in gunfire. Bullets tore into the cabin, but the warrior was gone, having dived behind a stack of cordwood. "You've got him pinned!" Skull yelled. "Flanking party! Go! Burn him out!" 3 men with torches broke from cover, running right past Elara's side window. She smashed the glass with her Winchester. Crack, crack, crack. Her shots kicked up snow inches from their boots. They yelped and dove for cover, pinned down. The battle was now a 3-way standoff. Skull, distracted, loosened his grip on Sheriff Brody. The sheriff, finding his limit, slammed his head back into Skull's nose. As Skull bellowed in pain, Brody tackled him. The 2 men rolled in the snow, grappling. Skull's men hesitated, leaderless. The warrior burst from the woodpile, running low and fast toward Skull. A rancher raised his rifle, but crack! Elara's shot from the window shattered the gun's stock. The warrior was on Skull. He ripped the larger man off Brody and pressed the hot tip of the fireplace poker to Skull's throat. The street went dead silent. The only sounds were Skull's ragged, terrified breathing and the sizzle of the poker. Skull's men lowered their rifles. Sheriff Brody, bruised and gasping, retrieved his revolver and handcuffed his prisoner. "Jedediah Skull," he panted, "you are under arrest. For everything." The warrior ignored the defeated men. He walked to Elara, who held the sleeping Citan. He had his justice. He just needed his son. She held the baby out. The warrior took him, burying his face in the child's blanket, a mask of profound, unshakable relief. The siege was over. The aftermath was a stunned silence. Skull and his men were jailed, and the town, ashamed of its prejudice, shunned Elara. She had exposed the monster they had protected. Before the warrior left, he and Elara stood on the porch. He gave her his own hawk feather amulet, and she returned his son's dragonfly carving. He spoke one word, "Wapila, thank you," and holding Citan tight, walked away. Sheriff Brody, with newfound resolve, assured Elara he would hold Skull until the marshals arrived, and that no one would follow the Lakota father. Days later, spurred by Elara's frantic telegraph, U.S. Marshals rode into Deliverance. They took Skull in irons, and he was never seen again. Elara rebuilt her life, no longer a widow, but a woman who had won. The true thaw came in spring. On her porch, Elara found a gift: cured furs, tiny moccasins, and a perfect hawk feather. His family was safe. She hung the feather in her window, a private treaty in a world still at war, a symbol of the peace she had earned. The story of Elara Vance and the warrior father isn't just a story from the past. It's a testament to the fact that true courage isn't about the fight you can win, but the stand you must take. She had no army, no power, and a town against her. But she had a conscience, and she had a weapon the town didn't understand: the truth. She proves that one voice, speaking clearly, can be louder than a mob. What do you think? Was Elara's greatest weapon the telegraph, or her own compassion? What do you think happened to the warrior's family after? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of unlikely courage and hidden truths moved you, please help us tell more stories like it. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thank you for watching.